And my youngest, who... My father's voice faltered as he stood at the podium receiving the Navy League's highest honor, his embarrassment palpable as 300 distinguished naval officers waited for him to finish introducing his family. Admiral William Harrison had just praised my brother Commander Ryan's achievements, but clearly struggled to find anything meaningful to say about his disappointing daughter who did something with logistics. For 15 years, my family had treated me as the Harrison who couldn't quite measure up to their naval excellence, the invisible daughter whose career was too modest to warrant detailed explanation. But as my father stumbled through his acceptance speech, a young lieutenant commander stood up from the audience. "Excuse me, Admiral," he said with respectful urgency, "but I believe your daughter's name is already on that plaque. If you've ever watched family ignorance collapse under truth, type 'revealed' below. What happened next would change everything my family thought they knew about naval achievement and the daughter they'd been overlooking for decades." The humiliation had been building for 15 years, but it reached its devastating crescendo on a crisp November evening at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, where the Navy League's annual awards dinner was celebrating the finest traditions of American naval excellence. The historic Pringle Hall was filled with 400 distinguished guests, admirals, senior captains, defense officials, and maritime leaders who shaped naval policy at the highest levels of government. I sat at table 9, positioned where family members could be acknowledged without prominent display, wearing my dress white uniform and watching my father prepare to receive the Navy League's most prestigious honor. Admiral William Harrison commanded the room's attention even in civilian formal wear, his bearing radiating the authority that had made him legendary during 38 years of distinguished naval service. At the head table, my brother Commander Ryan Harrison sat in his dress whites, the gold oak leaves of his recently earned promotion catching the chandelier light. At 35, Ryan embodied everything the Harrison family valued in naval officers: nuclear submarine qualified, with successful department head tours, and a reputation for operational excellence that marked him as destined for flag rank. The contrast between Ryan's prominent seating and my placement among extended family was intentional and familiar. Admiral Harrison had spent decades building a naval legacy. And my youngest, who... My father's voice faltered as he stood at the podium receiving the Navy League's highest honor, his embarrassment palpable as 300 distinguished naval officers waited for him to finish introducing his family. Admiral William Harrison had just praised my brother Commander Ryan's achievements, but clearly struggled to find anything meaningful to say about his disappointing daughter who did something with logistics. For 15 years, my family had treated me as the Harrison who couldn't quite measure up to their naval excellence, the invisible daughter whose career was too modest to warrant detailed explanation. But as my father stumbled through his acceptance speech, a young lieutenant commander stood up from the audience. "Excuse me, Admiral," he said with respectful urgency, "but I believe your daughter's name is already on that plaque. If you've ever watched family ignorance collapse under truth, type 'revealed' below. What happened next would change everything my family thought they knew about naval achievement and the daughter they'd been overlooking for decades." The humiliation had been building for 15 years, but it reached its devastating crescendo on a crisp November evening at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, where the Navy League's annual awards dinner was celebrating the finest traditions of American naval excellence. The historic Pringle Hall was filled with 400 distinguished guests, admirals, senior captains, defense officials, and maritime leaders who shaped naval policy at the highest levels of government. I sat at table 9, positioned where family members could be acknowledged without prominent display, wearing my dress white uniform and watching my father prepare to receive the Navy League's most prestigious honor. Admiral William Harrison commanded the room's attention even in civilian formal wear, his bearing radiating the authority that had made him legendary during 38 years of distinguished naval service. At the head table, my brother Commander Ryan Harrison sat in his dress whites, the gold oak leaves of his recently earned promotion catching the chandelier light. At 35, Ryan embodied everything the Harrison family valued in naval officers: nuclear submarine qualified, with successful department head tours, and a reputation for operational excellence that marked him as destined for flag rank. The contrast between Ryan's prominent seating and my placement among extended family was intentional and familiar. Admiral Harrison had spent decades building a naval legacy that celebrated conventional achievement and tactical brilliance, and within that framework, Ryan was the golden son, while I was the disappointing deviation from family tradition. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Admiral Patricia Chen, the Navy League's national president, "tonight we honor a naval officer whose career represents 4 decades of leadership, innovation, and dedication to maritime excellence. Admiral William Harrison's contributions to submarine warfare doctrine and naval strategy have shaped American naval superiority across multiple decades." The assembled guests rose in recognition as my father approached the podium to receive the Distinguished Service Award, his naval bearing evident in every measured step. This moment represented the pinnacle of professional recognition, validation from the naval community that had defined his identity for 4 decades. As my father began his acceptance speech, I felt the familiar weight of invisibility that had characterized my presence at family military events for 15 years. While Ryan's achievements were celebrated and discussed in detail, my own naval career existed in a strange parallel universe where accomplishments were either unknown or misunderstood. Service to our nation requires sacrifice from both those who wear the uniform and the families who support them. I've been privileged to serve alongside the finest naval officers our nation produces, and blessed with a family that understands the demands of naval excellence. He gestured toward the head table, where Ryan sat with obvious pride. "My son, Commander Ryan Harrison, represents the next generation of submarine leadership. His service aboard USS Virginia and USS Colorado have demonstrated the tactical expertise and command presence that will guide our submarine force through future challenges." The praise for Ryan was detailed and professionally sophisticated, establishing his credentials as a nuclear submarine officer whose achievements warranted recognition from the naval community's most senior leadership. But as my father's speech turned toward family acknowledgments, I could sense the approaching moment when my existence would require some form of recognition, however awkward or minimizing. "I'm also joined tonight by my daughter, Emma, who—" His voice faltered slightly as he searched for words to describe my career without revealing his fundamental ignorance of my actual naval service, "who is here tonight and serves our Navy in her own way." The phrase "serves our Navy in her own way" was diplomatically vague, suggesting that my contribution operated outside mainstream naval excellence in ways too specialized or modest to warrant detailed explanation to sophisticated audiences. The awkward pause that followed was filled with polite applause from guests who understood they were witnessing a father's struggle to acknowledge a family member whose achievements apparently couldn't be articulated alongside serious naval accomplishments. I absorbed this public diminishment while reviewing operational reports from my destroyer's recent deployment, where we had conducted freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea that directly challenged Chinese maritime expansion and upheld international law through American naval presence. What the distinguished audience didn't know was that Captain Emma Harrison wasn't sitting in that ballroom as an overlooked family appendage attending her father's triumph. I was there as the commanding officer of USS Winston C. Churchill, one of the Navy's most advanced Arleigh-Burke-class destroyers, recently completed with the most successful deployment in my ship's operational history. But my family's systematic ignorance of my naval career had created a parallel reality where I appeared to be exactly what they believed, a disappointing naval officer whose service contributed nothing meaningful to maritime warfare or family military legacy. The reception following the award ceremony provided opportunities for the extended naval community to congratulate my father and discuss current challenges facing American maritime strategy. I moved through conversations about naval warfare and strategic policy while maintaining the low profile that had somehow become necessary to avoid family confrontations about my supposed limitations. "Emma," approached Captain Wilson, one of my father's Naval War College colleagues who had served with him during submarine deployments in the 1990s. Your father tells me you work in naval logistics coordination. That's crucial support for operational forces. Something like that, I replied, maintaining the fiction that had developed over years of family misunderstanding about my actual career trajectory. Ship operations and maritime coordination. The deliberate vagueness. The reception following the award ceremony provided opportunities for the extended naval community to congratulate my father and discuss current challenges facing American maritime strategy. I moved through conversations about naval warfare and strategic policy while maintaining the low profile that had somehow become necessary to avoid family confrontations about my supposed limitations. Emma approached Captain Wilson, one of my father's Naval War College colleagues who had served with him during submarine deployments in the 1990s. Your father tells me you work in naval logistics coordination. That's crucial support for operational forces. Something like that, I replied, maintaining the fiction that had developed over years of family misunderstanding about my actual career trajectory. Ship operations and maritime coordination. The deliberate vagueness was designed to avoid conversations that would reveal information my family had somehow failed to learn despite 15 years of my naval service. Important work, Captain Wilson agreed, with the diplomatic courtesy senior officers showed toward family members whose careers represented supporting rather than leading roles. The fleet depends on effective logistics coordination for operational success. Before I could respond, Ryan approached our conversation with the confident bearing that marked someone whose naval achievements were understood and celebrated by everyone around him. Captain Wilson, Ryan said with professional warmth, have you had a chance to discuss submarine warfare evolution with my father? His insights about nuclear propulsion development are fascinating. The conversation shifted immediately to technical discussions about submarine capabilities and strategic deterrence, while I listened with the invisible presence that had somehow become my role in family naval gatherings. Emma does solid work in her logistics role, Ryan added when Captain Wilson asked about my naval experience, but submarine warfare requires a different level of technical complexity and operational responsibility. I absorbed this casual dismissal while mentally reviewing the tactical decisions I had made during recent destroyer operations, including surface warfare engagements that required split-second judgment about weapons deployment and maritime law interpretation under hostile conditions. As the reception continued, I encountered dozens of naval officers who had been told various versions of my supposed support role, creating a collective family narrative that positioned me as someone whose naval service operated safely outside the challenging domains where real naval leadership was tested. But 20 minutes into the reception, something happened that would transform the evening from a celebration of my father's achievement into the most devastating family revelation in Harrison naval history. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, a young surface warfare officer who had graduated from the Naval Academy 3 years behind me, was studying the wall displays that honored previous Navy League Distinguished Service Award recipients. The historic plaques dated back decades, recognizing naval officers whose contributions had shaped American maritime excellence. Admiral Harrison, she said with respectful curiosity, approaching my father near the reception's memorial wall, I noticed something interesting about the 2019 Distinguished Service Award recipient. My father looked confused but interested, clearly wondering what historical detail had captured the attention of a junior officer during his celebration. The 2019 recipient, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell continued with growing excitement, was Captain Emma Harrison, commanding officer of USS Winston S. Churchill, recognized for exceptional surface warfare leadership and tactical innovation during Persian Gulf operations. The words Captain Emma Harrison hit the reception like a depth charge, sending shockwaves through conversations as distinguished guests began processing information that contradicted everything they had been told about Harrison family naval hierarchy. My father's confident expression shifted to confusion, mixed with what looked like growing alarm as he processed the implications of what the young officer was suggesting. "I'm sorry," he said carefully, "but I think there may be some confusion. Emma works in logistics coordination, not ship command." Lieutenant Commander Mitchell consulted the plaque again with professional precision. "No, sir, this is definitely accurate. Captain Emma Harrison, USS Winston C. Churchill. The citation specifically mentions surface warfare excellence and tactical leadership under hostile conditions." Admiral Chen, who had been congratulating other reception guests, approached our conversation with obvious professional interest in what was developing into something more significant than casual historical discussion. "What's the question about the 2019 award?" asked she with the authority that marked someone who had administered Navy League recognition for distinguished naval service across multiple decades. "We're discussing Captain Harrison's Distinguished Service Award," Lieutenant Commander Mitchell explained, and Admiral Harrison seems surprised by the information. The clarification created expanding circles of attention as other reception guests began to understand that they were witnessing some kind of family revelation about naval achievements and recognition. Admiral Chen studied the memorial plaque with the professional attention that marked someone reading official naval citations. Yes, Captain Harrison's 2019 award recognized exceptional surface warfare leadership. Her destroyer operations in the Persian Gulf represented tactical excellence under challenging operational conditions. She turned to address my father directly. "Captain Harrison's command of USS Winston C. Churchill has been exemplary. Her tactical innovations in surface warfare have influenced doctrine across the destroyer community." The professional assessment landed like artillery fire in a reception hall that had just heard my father describe me as someone who served the Navy in my own way, without meriting detailed explanation to serious naval audiences. My father looked across the crowded reception until his eyes found me standing near the historical displays. And for the first time in 15 years, he was seeing me as something other than the disappointing daughter whose naval career had fallen short of Harrison family expectations. "Emma," he said slowly, his voice carrying confusion mixed with what appeared to be dawning comprehension, "you command a destroyer?" The question was asked loud enough for surrounding conversations to pause as distinguished naval guests turned their attention toward what was developing into the most dramatic family revelation in Navy League ceremony history. Before I could respond, Admiral Chen provided additional context that would complete the destruction of my family's carefully constructed narrative about naval achievement and hierarchy. "Captain Harrison commands one of our most advanced Arleigh Burke-class destroyers," she announced to the crowding gathering of interested officers. Her recent deployment included freedom of navigation operations that directly challenged hostile maritime expansion and upheld international law through superior seamanship and tactical expertise. The implications were devastating and immediate. While my family had spent 15 years treating me as a supporting player in naval service, I had been commanding operations that protected American maritime interests at the strategic level that most naval officers never encountered. My father approached me with movements that suggested he was approaching a stranger rather than his daughter, his lifetime of naval experience finally allowing him to process information that upturned 15 years of family mythology. The woman they had dismissed as a logistics coordinator was about to be revealed as one of the most accomplished surface warfare officers in the contemporary Navy, and this reception was about to become something none of them had anticipated. The silence that followed Admiral Chen's announcement was electric with tension, as 400 distinguished naval guests processed information that completely overturned everything they had just heard about Harrison family naval hierarchy. My father stood frozen near the memorial wall, his mind struggling to reconcile the daughter he had just described in dismissive terms with the destroyer commanding officer whose achievements apparently merited the Navy's highest civilian recognition. Captain Harrison, Admiral Chen continued with obvious professional respect, perhaps you could clarify your recent operational deployments for your family. I believe they may not be fully aware of your naval service record. The invitation to explain my own career was both generous and devastating, offering me the opportunity to educate my family about 15 years of naval service they had somehow failed to understand or acknowledge. I looked around the reception at the faces of naval officers who had spent the evening celebrating conventional achievements while remaining ignorant of operations that had shaped maritime security in multiple theaters. "I command USS Winston S. Churchill," I said simply, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent reception hall. "DDG-81, R. Lee Burke-class guided missile destroyer homeported in Norfolk, Virginia." The technical specifications were delivered with the matter-of-fact precision that destroyer commanding officers used when discussing their ships, but the words hit my family like incoming missiles. Ryan stepped forward with obvious confusion mixed with what looked like growing alarm. "Emma, you told us you worked in logistics coordination. You never mentioned commanding a warship." "I stopped mentioning my assignments," I replied with the clinical honesty that had served me well during hostile interrogations, "because the family wasn't interested in information that contradicted your preferred narrative about naval achievement." Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, whose historical curiosity had triggered this revelation, consulted her phone with the professional thoroughness that marked serious naval research. "Ma'am," she said with growing excitement, "your operational record is extraordinary. USS Winston Churchill's recent deployment included freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea, anti-piracy missions off Somalia, and coalition operations in the Persian Gulf." Each operational theater she mentioned represented months of complex maritime operations requiring tactical expertise and strategic judgment that most naval officers never encountered in entire careers. Furthermore, Admiral Chen added, consulting information that had apparently been forwarded to her secure device, "Captain Harrison's tactical innovations during Strait of Hormuz operations prevented 3 separate incidents that could have triggered international maritime conflicts." The comparison between my classified operational achievements and my family's understanding of my career was devastating in its scope. While they had dismissed me as a support officer, I had been preventing wars through superior seamanship and tactical decision-making. My father approached me with movements that suggested he was meeting a stranger rather than acknowledging his daughter, his extensive submarine experience finally allowing him to grasp the magnitude of what he was learning. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice carrying the shock of someone whose worldview was being systematically dismantled, "you've been commanding destroyer operations for how long?" 3 years aboard Winston Churchill, previously executive officer aboard USS Porter for 2 years, with department head tours aboard USS Ramage and USS Mason. The career progression I outlined represented 15 years of increasingly responsible surface warfare assignments that had culminated in destroyer command, one of the most demanding leadership positions in the contemporary Navy. Admiral Chen stepped forward with additional information that would complete my family's education about naval excellence and achievement. "Captain Harrison's command tour has been exceptional," she announced to the assembled reception guests. "Winston Churchill achieved the highest operational readiness scores in destroyer squadron history, with combat systems proficiency that exceeds fleet standards by significant margins." Commander Sarah Rodriguez, a fellow destroyer commanding officer who had been attending the reception, approached our conversation with obvious professional admiration. "Ma'am," she said to me directly, "your ship's performance during the coalition exercise last spring was legendary among surface warfare officers. The tactical coordination you demonstrated under simulated combat conditions redefined destroyer employment doctrine." The technical praise was specific and professionally sophisticated, establishing credentials that even my submarine-qualified family members could recognize as representing the pinnacle of naval surface warfare expertise. But the most devastating revelation was still to come. "There's additional recognition that your family should be aware of," Admiral Chen said, consulting classified information on her secure device.
Captain Harrison's selection for promotion to Rear Admiral, making her one of the youngest female flag officers in surface warfare history. The promotion announcement hit the reception like a nuclear explosion, sending shockwaves through a crowd that had spent the evening celebrating my father's conventional naval achievement while remaining ignorant of excellence that exceeded his own distinguished career. Ryan looked like he was about to faint as he processed numbers that made his submarine department head tour seem modest in comparison to destroyer command and flag officer selection. "Rear Admiral?" my father whispered, his voice barely audible across the stunned reception hall. "Emma, you're being promoted to flag rank?" "The selection board met last month," I confirmed, with the calm authority that had guided me through hostile maritime encounters. I looked around the reception at naval officers who had spent the evening discussing tactical innovation and strategic leadership while remaining ignorant of someone whose achievements exceeded most of their combined experience. "For 15 years, you've treated me as the family disappointment whose naval career represented failure to achieve Harrison's standards of excellence. The daughter you dismissed as a logistics coordinator has been commanding operations that protect every naval vessel in the fleet." Admiral Wilson, who had earlier praised my important logistics work, stepped forward with obvious professional embarrassment. "Captain Harrison, I owe you an apology for my assumptions about your naval service. I had no idea of your actual command responsibilities." "You had no idea because my family's narrative required my achievements to remain invisible," I replied with the precision I used when correcting tactical errors during combat exercises. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell provided additional context that would permanently alter how everyone present understood naval excellence and family dynamics. "Ma'am," she announced to the assembled officers, "Captain Harrison's Naval Academy class ranking was 3rd overall, with distinction in seamanship, navigation, and tactical studies. Her midshipman record predicted exactly the kind of exceptional naval service we've witnessed." The academic credentials were devastating in their implications. While my family had somehow concluded that I lacked the capabilities for serious naval service, the Naval Academy had identified me as someone destined for command excellence from the beginning of my career.
My father looked around the reception hall at the naval officers who had been celebrating his achievement, then back at me with an expression that combined shock, embarrassment, and dawning comprehension of how fundamentally he had misunderstood his own daughter. "Emma," he said desperately, "why didn't you tell us about your achievements? Why didn't you explain that you were commanding destroyers?" I considered his question with the analytical precision I applied to tactical assessments under hostile conditions. "Because every time I mentioned naval success, the conversation was redirected to Ryan's achievements or dismissed as exaggeration," I replied with clinical honesty. "It became easier to let you believe what you preferred to believe rather than fighting for recognition you weren't prepared to provide." The accusation was specific and devastating, delivered in front of naval professionals whose opinions would shape both our future career prospects. Admiral Chen approached me with the authority that came from decades of naval service and community leadership. "Captain Harrison," she said with formal recognition, "your naval service represents exactly the kind of excellence the Navy League exists to honor. Your achievements deserve celebration rather than family misunderstanding." As I prepared to leave the reception for operational requirements that would take me back to Winston Churchill and preparation for our next deployment, I addressed my family directly for what I knew might be the final time. "Congratulations on your award, Admiral Harrison," I said with professional courtesy. "Your naval service has been distinguished and worthy of recognition." I looked at Ryan, whose submarine career had been celebrated while my destroyer command remained unknown to our own family. "Commander Harrison," I continued with the formality that marked interactions between professional colleagues rather than family members, "I wish you success in your future assignments." 6 months later, I was promoted to Rear Admiral in a ceremony attended by the Secretary of the Navy and the Chief of Naval Operations. My parents sat in the audience, their expressions carrying a mixture of pride and deep regret for 15 years of misunderstanding and dismissal.
But the relationship had changed permanently. The daughter they had overlooked had become the flag officer whose achievements exceeded their own, and that transformation created distance that protocol and respect couldn't bridge. Standing on the bridge of my flagship during operations that would never appear in family conversations, I felt the deep satisfaction of someone who had finally stopped seeking approval from people whose understanding was constrained by their own limitations. I was Rear Admiral Emma Steele Harrison, commanding naval operations that protected American maritime interests worldwide, and I had finally stopped pretending to be anything less than extraordinary. The war for family recognition was over, but I had moved beyond needing their validation. The Navy had always known exactly who I was. Only my family had remained willfully ignorant of excellence that had been achieved in their midst. Sometimes the people closest to you see you the least. If you've ever been overlooked by family who couldn't see your achievements, if you've ever stopped sharing success because no one was listening, if you've ever had to choose between family approval and personal excellence, share your story below. Here, we celebrate those who excel in silence and find their validation in service rather than recognition.